Every factory has its own rhythm. The sound of hydraulic presses roaring like the heartbeat of industry, steady and precise. I used to know that rhythm like the back of my hand. It felt as if I was a part of the massive machine itself. But I guess I forgot something. To the people at the top, I'm just a gear. And gears can be replaced. My name is Thomas Granger, and I'm 54 years old. For the past 22 years, I've poured my life into that steel factory down south of Pittsburgh. I never imagined that one day I would receive a white slip instead of a thank you note, a brief message saying I was being replaced. Not because I made a mistake, not because I wasn't good enough, but simply because they found someone cheaper. I remember that day vividly. My back was drenched in sweat under my reflective vest, my hands covered in grease, and my eyes locked onto the awkward face of the new floor supervisor, Kyle, 29 years old, fresh out of an accelerated industrial management program, and never once stood next to a steel press in his life. "I know you've got a lot of experience, Mr. Granger," he said, trying to sound friendly. "But the company is cutting costs. I'll be taking over the supervisor position starting next week." When he spoke, I could hear the machines running in the background, almost as if the factory itself was mocking me. I didn't yell, didn't slam anything. I simply nodded, removed my hard hat, and walked out of the factory gates like a man whose identity had been taken away. But what they didn't know was, I wasn't the kind of guy to just fall down because of a kick. And even though I had lost everything, I still had one thing worth more than all of it: faith in myself. And that belief set off a chain of events that would turn everything upside down in a way no one could have predicted. The next few weeks were a blur. I felt like a ghost walking through my old life. I stopped by the factory every day, mostly to check in with the crew, but every time I stepped into that place, it was like I was an outsider. They didn't need me anymore. It was all about Kyle and his fresh ideas, none of which had ever been tested in a real industrial environment. He had all the latest management buzzwords, but no real-world experience. And as for the team, they were starting to see the cracks too. It wasn't long before things began to fall apart. You could feel it in the air, the tension building with each passing day. Machines that used to run like clockwork started malfunctioning more frequently. Kyle would stand there, fidgeting with his tablet, trying to fix things he didn't understand, while the workers grew more frustrated by the minute. I was a part of the old guard. I had seen machines break down, but I knew exactly what to do. It was second nature. But Kyle had no clue. He'd ask me for advice, then act like he didn't need it. There were days when I would walk past the shop floor, hearing the telltale signs of failure, screeching metal, strange rattles, and then the silence that followed when the machine stopped altogether. I knew what was coming. You can't run a factory with broken equipment, and Kyle wasn't prepared for it. But here's the thing. While the machines were failing, I wasn't about to just sit on the sidelines. I had been in this game for too long, and I wasn't going to let everything I'd built over the years fall apart just because of a clueless supervisor. I started quietly getting involved again, offering advice to some of the guys, helping them get the machines back up and running. It wasn't about taking over. It was about keeping the factory from falling apart entirely. I didn't want to see the place I'd dedicated so much of my life to crumble. Kyle didn't know it, but every time I helped one of the guys fix something, I was building a quiet network of support, people who still respected me, who still saw my value, even if Kyle didn't. But the real turning point came one afternoon when one of the machines completely broke down, causing a major delay in production. Kyle was in over his head, and the crew was starting to grumble. I could see the frustration in their eyes, and I knew that sooner or later, the tension would boil over. That was when I decided it was time to make my move. It was late in the afternoon when the crisis hit. One of the primary presses, an old but reliable machine that had been the backbone of the factory, suddenly shut down. The sound of its failure echoed through the entire production floor, and a wave of panic immediately set in. Kyle was standing near the machine, his face pale, staring at the control panel as though he could will the problem away. I could see the tension in the workers' faces. They were expecting Kyle to make a decision, but he was frozen, unsure of what to do. I was standing by the warehouse door when I saw him glance around, as if hoping for someone to step in. And that's when I knew. It was time. Without thinking twice, I walked over to him, my boots clicking against the concrete floor. He didn't look up at first, but when he did, I could see a mix of frustration and helplessness in his eyes. "Do you need help?" I asked simply, keeping my voice calm. His gaze flicked to the workers, who were now starting to whisper among themselves. They were waiting, watching to see what would happen. Kyle hesitated for a moment, his pride clearly at war with his need for help. But then he exhaled, a deep sigh, and nodded. "I can't fix this on my own," he admitted, his voice quiet. I didn't waste time with words. I walked straight to the press, examining the system's error logs on the control panel. Kyle hovered behind me, trying to look involved, but I could tell he had no idea what he was looking at. I motioned for him to hand me a tool from the toolbox nearby, and within minutes, I was back under the hood of the press, diagnosing the issue with practiced ease. "You see, this is the part that tends to wear out," I explained as I worked. "You can't just replace it with something cheap and expect it to work long term." I could feel the workers watching me, waiting for me to get it fixed. I didn't care about impressing anyone. This wasn't about that. It was about making sure the factory kept running. And more importantly, making sure Kyle knew that I could fix things. I worked quickly, my hands moving with confidence. In less than an hour, I had the machine back up and running. The press roared to life, its familiar hum filling the space, and the workers let out a collective sigh of relief. Kyle stepped back, his face showing a mix of awe and embarrassment. I don't know how you did that so quickly," he said, still processing what had just happened. I didn't answer him right away. I just wiped the grease from my hands and walked over to where the crew had gathered. I could see the respect in their eyes as they clapped me on the back, nodding their approval. It wasn't a big moment, but it was the start of something much bigger. I knew that the machines weren't the only thing that needed fixing. The entire atmosphere in the factory had shifted. The workers were beginning to doubt Kyle's ability to lead them, and I wasn't about to let things get worse. It wasn't just about saving the machines. It was about proving to everyone, including myself, that I still had what it took to lead. But as the day ended, I realized something even more important. This wasn't just about fixing machines. This was about taking back control, and I wasn't going to stop until I had done just that. The days that followed were like walking a tightrope. Every time I stepped onto the floor, it was as if I were treading a fine line between helping and overstepping. Kyle, though grateful for my expertise, began to resent my growing influence with the team. He was the official supervisor, but it was clear to everyone, including him, that I was the one who knew how things worked. I kept my distance from him, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't want to push him further. The cracks were already beginning to show in his leadership. The workers were increasingly looking to me for advice, and Kyle, though still trying to assert control, found himself growing more isolated. It was subtle at first, but soon enough, Kyle began to make mistakes, small ones, but they added up. Machines were being shut down unnecessarily, protocols were ignored, and schedules slipped. The factory was no longer running like the well-oiled machine it once was. But despite all this, I knew that my time at the factory was running out. I wasn't a permanent fixture anymore. Kyle was still the boss, and he could easily push me out if he chose to. The thought of being replaced again, without any say in the matter, gnawed at me. So I decided to take matters into my own hands, but not in the way Kyle might expect. I started talking to the other departments, engineering, maintenance, and even HR. The more I learned about the financials of the company, the clearer it became. The factory was in trouble. Equipment was aging, production costs were rising, and there was talk of outsourcing some jobs to overseas manufacturers. It wasn't just Kyle's incompetence that was causing problems. The factory itself was on the brink of collapse. But I also saw an opportunity for me to make a difference, to be the one to save the place that had been my second home for over 2 decades. I wasn't just some disgruntled former employee. I knew the heart of this place. I knew its history, its inner workings, and its people. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I could do more than just fix machines. I could fix the entire factory. I began to put together a plan. It started small, with some subtle suggestions for improving efficiency and cutting costs without compromising quality. I spoke with the engineers about upgrading some of the older machines that were constantly failing, and I started reaching out to suppliers to see if we could get better deals on parts. Every conversation, every idea I floated was carefully calculated. I wasn't just trying to impress anyone. I was trying to position myself as the only person who truly understood the factory's needs. But there was one thing I needed to make all of this work. I needed to confront Kyle. I needed to make him see that the factory was falling apart and that he was too blinded by his pride to do anything about it. But I wasn't about to do it in a way that would make him feel cornered. I had to play it smart, make him think that it was his idea all along. So, one evening after work, I asked him to meet me in the break room. The factory was quiet, the usual hum of machinery replaced by the occasional sound of footsteps echoing through the hallways. "Kyle, we need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. He looked at me, his face still tense from the pressure of his role. "What's this about, Granger?" "I think we both know the factory is in trouble," I began. "We're losing production time, and it's costing us. And I know you've been doing your best, but we both know it's not enough to turn this place around. The workers are frustrated, and the machines are on the brink of breaking down for good." Kyle frowned, his lips pressing together. "So, what's your solution?" I leaned forward, making sure he understood the gravity of what I was about to say. "We need to make some serious changes, Kyle. We need to reinvest in the factory, upgrade the equipment, and streamline the operations. But we can't do that without leadership that actually understands how this place works. I've been here for 22 years, and I know what it takes to keep this factory running. Maybe it's time we bring in someone who can fix the bigger problems." Kyle stared at me for a long moment. He was quiet, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't stupid. He knew I had a point. "I'm not saying you're a bad supervisor, Kyle," I added. "But we both know this factory needs more than just surface-level changes. It needs someone who can get their hands dirty, someone who's been through the trenches. It needs me." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought he was going to dismiss me. But then, to my surprise, he spoke. "You're right," he said slowly, his tone softer than I'd expected. I've been trying to do too much on my own. Maybe I've been out of my depth, but I'm willing to listen. Let's figure this out together." It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was the beginning of one. After that conversation with Kyle, things started to change. Not overnight, but there was a noticeable shift. It wasn't as if Kyle suddenly became a perfect leader, but he began to acknowledge my experience and value. Slowly, but surely, I was able to start implementing some of the changes I'd suggested. And the more I got involved, the more I could see the results. The first thing I tackled was the machines. I wasn't just talking about replacing parts. We needed a comprehensive plan to upgrade our aging equipment. It was something I'd always known we'd need to do, but Kyle had resisted it in the past, either because he didn't understand the urgency or because he was afraid of the cost. But once I showed him the numbers, the cost of repairs versus the cost of replacement, he started to see things differently. Together, We secured a budget to start bringing in new machines and replacing the outdated ones. Meanwhile, I kept working with the crew. I made sure they knew what was going on every step of the way. The workers appreciated the transparency, and morale started to improve. They could see the changes happening, and they felt like they were a part of something bigger. For the first time in months, they began to believe that the factory wasn't doomed. That made all the difference. But the real breakthrough came when we decided to overhaul the scheduling system. Under Kyle's watch, production had been slow, and the machines were often idled for hours because of poor planning. It wasn't Kyle's fault directly. He simply didn't have the knowledge to optimize the system. But with my experience and understanding of the flow, I was able to come up with a more efficient production schedule. We were able to run more shifts without overburdening the workers, which meant we could increase output without compromising quality. Still, even as things began to improve, there was a part of me that knew this wasn't just about fixing the factory anymore. It was about saving my own reputation. I had been replaced once, and now I wasn't going to let it happen again. But more than that, I wasn't going to let the factory fall back into the hands of someone who didn't understand it. A week into the improvements, we saw the first signs of success. Production times were decreasing, machines were running smoother, and the workers were noticeably more confident. The factory was picking up speed again, and we were meeting deadlines we hadn't been able to hit in months. But there was still one more step, proving to the upper management that I was the one who should be in charge. Kyle was doing better, but I knew he wasn't fully equipped to handle the scope of the changes the factory needed. The big decision, whether they would promote him or me, was fast approaching. It was time to put my cards on the table. I scheduled a meeting with the plant manager, the one who had hired Kyle and initially pushed me out of the spotlight. His name was Rick, and I knew that if I could convince him, I would have the opportunity I needed to take full control and steer the factory in the right direction. Rick wasn't an easy man to impress. He'd seen a lot of supervisors come and go over the years, but he respected results. And I knew that now, after the improvements we'd made, I had something undeniable to show him. The meeting was set for the following Friday. I spent the next few days preparing my case, gathering data, showing proof of the improvements, and laying out the plan for the future. Kyle was hesitant about the idea at first, unsure if he was ready to push for a change. But I reassured him. "Look," I said one evening while we were working late, "this is bigger than both of us. We have a chance to turn this place around, but we need to make sure that whoever's in charge can actually lead it. If I'm being honest with you, I'm the one who knows how to fix this factory for good." Kyle looked at me, his face a mixture of frustration and resignation. "I'm not a bad guy, Granger. I don't know if I'm cut out for this." I patted him on the back. "It's not about being bad or good, Kyle. It's about what the factory needs right now. You've helped, but it's time for someone who can make the tough calls." He nodded, and we both knew what had to happen next. The battle for control had already begun, and all we needed now was the right opening to make our case. Friday came faster than I expected. The factory was buzzing with a different kind of energy that day, tighter, more focused. I knew this meeting would be a turning point, one way or another. If I succeeded, I'd have the reins of this factory back in my hands. If I failed, I could be back at square one, with no job and no future. But failure wasn't an option. Not now, not after everything we'd done to get to this point. As the hour for the meeting drew closer, I went over the numbers one last time, making sure every detail was in place. I wasn't just presenting myself as a solution. I was presenting a vision for the future of the factory. A future where it thrived, where the workers were respected, the machines were efficient, and the bottom line wasn't just healthy, but growing. Kyle, though he had supported me, wasn't fully on board with the idea of pushing for me to take the lead. He was nervous about alienating upper management, and I could understand that. He had always been loyal to them, even when they weren't loyal to him. I didn't have that loyalty. I wasn't going to kiss up to anyone for a seat at the table. I had earned it through sweat, blood, and years of experience. And I wasn't going to let anyone forget that. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m., and I could feel the tension rising as the clock ticked closer to the time. Kyle was there with me, sitting quietly at the back of the conference room, while I stood before Rick, who was already seated at the head of the table. "Mr. Rick," I started, keeping my voice steady and confident. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet today. I know things haven't been easy around here recently, but I'm here to show you that there's a way forward. A way to not just fix this factory, but to take it to the next level." Rick, a man in his late 50s with a permanent frown, gave me a measured look. He was a no-nonsense type, and I knew that flattery or empty promises wouldn't win him over. I had to lay out the cold, hard facts. "I've been with this factory for 22 years, I continued. "I've seen it go through highs and lows, but right now, we're at a critical juncture. The equipment is aging, the production timelines are slipping, and if we don't act soon, we're going to be looking at an even bigger crisis. But that's not the worst part. The real problem is leadership." I let that hang in the air for a moment, watching Rick's expression change slightly. He didn't react, but I could see the flicker of interest in his eyes. "We've made some changes already," I said, pulling up a slide on the projector that showed the improvements we'd made in the last few weeks. "Production is up, downtime is down, and we're hitting targets we haven't seen in months. But this is just the beginning. The factory needs a new direction, and the workers need someone they can trust to lead them." Rick leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he listened. I didn't give him a chance to interrupt. I kept pushing forward. "Kyle has done his best, but he's not equipped to handle the changes that need to be made. The factory needs someone who understands the technical side of things, someone who knows how to optimize production and keep the workforce engaged, someone who has the experience, the vision, and the leadership to take us into the future." I paused, letting my words sink in. I didn't just want to show that I was the right person for the job. I needed to make Rick see that keeping Kyle in charge would be a mistake. It wasn't about tearing Kyle down. It was about positioning myself as the only person who had the right balance of experience and expertise to turn things around. "I'm not asking for a promotion, Rick," I said, finally making eye contact with him. "I'm showing you that I can make a difference, that I can save this factory, and I can make it thrive. But for that to happen, I need the freedom to implement the changes we've discussed." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I could hear the faint hum of the machines outside the room, the distant murmur of workers moving about. But in that moment, the factory seemed to be holding its breath. Rick didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath and looked over at Kyle, who was sitting quietly at the back of the room, his face unreadable. "Well, Kyle," Rick said, his voice low. "What do you think?" Kyle shifted in his seat, his eyes flickering to me before he lowered his gaze. I think Granger's right. I'm not the right person to lead this place anymore. I've tried, but I know that the factory needs more than I can offer." It was the moment I'd been waiting for. Kyle had stepped aside in a way that made it clear he understood what was at stake. He didn't say it in so many words, but I could feel the weight of his admission. He knew I was the one who could save the factory. Rick didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath and looked over at Kyle, who was sitting quietly at the back of the room, his face unreadable. "Well, Kyle," Rick said, his voice low. "What do you think?" Kyle shifted in his seat, his eyes flickering to me before he lowered his gaze. I think Granger's right. I'm not the right person to lead this place anymore. I've tried, but I know that the factory needs more than I can offer." It was the moment I'd been waiting for. Kyle had stepped aside in a way that made it clear he understood what was at stake. He didn't say it in so many words, but I could feel the weight of his admission. He knew I was the one who could save the factory. Rick nodded slowly, then turned back to me. "All right, Granger," he said, his voice steady. "You've got the job. I'll have HR start the paperwork." I had done it. After all the struggles, all the setbacks, I had finally achieved what I set out to do. But as I stood there, hearing those words, I knew this was just the beginning. The real work was only just starting. I wasn't going to rest on my laurels. The factory had a future, and I was going to make sure that future was one of success, growth, and stability. And as for Kyle, I knew he would always be a part of the team, just not in the way he'd imagined. He would learn to respect the decision, just as I had learned to respect the hard truth, that sometimes the right person for the job isn't the one with the title, but the one who knows how to make the tough calls. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, plans, and late nights. But the factory was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. I was no longer just a cog in the machine. I was the one driving it. The momentum we had started building with the upgrades and changes was gaining speed, and I could feel the tide turning. This wasn't just about salvaging a struggling factory anymore. It was about taking it to places I'd only dreamed of before. Rick's approval had been the final seal on everything. As soon as he gave me the green light, I went full throttle. I gathered the team and laid out my vision for the future. The workers who had once been skeptical of the changes were now rallying behind me. They could see that the factory had a leader who wasn't just talking about change, but was actively making it happen. The first major shift was the overhaul of the machine maintenance schedule. I'd always known that our issues weren't just about the equipment breaking down. It was about the way we were treating it. We weren't prioritizing maintenance the way we should have been, and it was costing us. We brought in specialists to give us the kind of preventative care the machines needed, and the results were immediate. Downtime decreased, production was smoother, and I could see that the workers were beginning to feel more confident. But it wasn't just about the machines. I knew the real heart of the factory was the people. I made sure to keep communication open, not just in terms of what was happening in the factory, but also how the workers were feeling. Every week, I held a town hall where anyone could speak up about what they saw as problems, what was working, and where we could improve. At first, it was a little awkward. Some people weren't used to having a leader who actually listened, but soon, they began to appreciate the transparency. The culture was shifting, and the energy in the factory was undeniable. But there was one person I hadn't fully accounted for, Kyle. Despite stepping aside, I could tell that he was struggling with his new role. It wasn't easy for him to go from being the guy in charge to being a subordinate, and I understood that. I didn't want to rub his face in the fact that I'd taken his position, but I also knew that the factory's success was what mattered most. So, I made it a point to support him where I could. One afternoon, as I was walking through the factory floor, I saw him sitting on a bench, looking out over the production lines. His posture was defeated, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Had I pushed him too hard? Had I been too focused on my own success that I had overlooked his struggle? I walked over to him and sat down next to him. He didn't say anything at first, but after a few minutes, he let out a long sigh. "I'm not cut out for this, Granger," he said, the words coming out almost like a confession. "I tried. I really did. But it's not me. I don't have the drive you do." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not about drive, Kyle. It's about the right fit. You've got a lot of skills, and I don't want you to think you've failed. You've helped turn this place around already. But I need you in a role that's better suited for you, something that lets you use your strengths without all the pressure of managing everything." He looked at me surprised. "What do you mean?" "I'm putting together a team of project managers to oversee different parts of the factory: maintenance, operations, logistics. I want you to head up one of those teams. You'll still be in charge of something important, but it won't be the same level of pressure as before. I know you've got what it takes, Kyle. You just need the right environment." For the first time in weeks, Kyle smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was enough to show me that he was starting to believe in himself again. "Thanks, Granger," he said. "I guess I was just scared. But maybe you're right. I'm not a manager. But I can make things happen. I can fix problems." And that was all I needed to hear. Kyle wasn't the right fit for the factory manager position, but he was still a vital part of the team. And now, he would have the chance to thrive in a role that actually played to his strengths. It was a win for everyone. As the months went by, the factory continued to improve. We hit new production records, built stronger relationships with our suppliers, and earned the trust of upper management. Rick was impressed, and he kept sending more resources our way. Our workforce was working together like never before, and I could see the pride in their eyes. They weren't just working for a paycheck anymore. They were working for a shared vision, one that we were all a part of. And then, the big moment came. We were nominated for an industry award for excellence in manufacturing. I stood in front of the team at the factory's annual holiday party, holding the award in my hand, surrounded by people who had become not just colleagues, but friends. This wasn't just my victory. It was ours. I had proven that sometimes all it takes is the right leadership, a willingness to listen, and a dedication to the people who make things happen. I was no longer just the guy they had replaced. I was the one who had brought the factory back from the brink, and I had done it with integrity, hard work, and the belief that a team working together could accomplish anything. The factory was thriving. Kyle had found his place, and I had found mine. But even as I held that award in my hand, I knew the journey wasn't over. It was just the beginning. Because the real work wasn't in fixing the machines or revamping the schedule. The real work was in building something that could last, something that would stand the test of time. And that, I realized, was the true reward.